Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to another episode of That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we dive into a different Disney Plus offering and discuss its history, how it holds up today, and our general impressions of the thing. Joining me today, we have once again Logan Wilkinson. How you doing, Logan?
I'm doing great.
As I'm saying that, I need to switch the Chiron on on the video version because I had you there as Cameron Abbott. Oh, and I'm also realizing I'm on the That Nerdy Site Show template. So there we go. Swap it to D plus. There we go.
On the fly.
I was like, why would I have had Cameron on this? Oh, that's right. I'm using the wrong template. Oops. But today we're going to be talking kind of closing out our little trilogy, actually quadrilogy, since we did 2 episodes on Edge of History, but our National Treasure series that we've been doing the last couple weeks, and then one at the end of last year with National Treasure Book of Secrets today. Why do we pick it? Because we've been doing other National Treasure things, so it made sense to just go ahead and knock this one out of the park too. So a lot of kind of the rigmarole that we usually do here is pretty much a repeat of last week, but we will dive into a few different little things here, including some fun facts I found when I was digging into like how this movie did and performed and stuff like that compared to other movies of their respective
Feels very
years.
That Bond show to have the top grossing movie of the year on the list. I love it.
Indeed, yeah. So yes, the history lesson here, this film was originally released December 21st, 2007. Ended up being the 8th highest grossing movie of 2007 domestically, with about $220 million. For reference, Spider-Man 3 was number 1 and Shrek the Third was number 2 of that year. Compare that to the original National Treasure in 2004. The original National Treasure had a $173 million gross, so about $50 million less. And then I'm guessing word of mouth got out over the ensuing years, or everybody watched it in their high school American history classes like you did.
Hell yeah.
So when the sequel came out, people were primed to get it. And then oddly enough, the number 1 movie of 2004 was Shrek 2, and the number 2 movie was Spider-Man 2. All that domestically. So it was a fun little like seeing the like reversal of fortunes between Shrek and Spider-Man there, and the fact that all 3 of them were on this 3-year cycle.
I think it's really interesting, this list too, because Spider-Man has remained Spider-Man, and you know, National Treasure obviously ends here and then had the reboot, but I think people forget just how truly massive Shrek was in the early 2000s, right? Like I think at this point, like it's become such a like internet meme, and they've churned out so many sequels and so many like there's a like
Puss in Boots
has his own trilogy. Like there's so many other like. And they've Christmas special, like there's so much other shit around Shrek now, but like those first 2 movies in particular were massive deals. Like Shrek 2 almost like I think it grossed almost $1 billion at the box office. Like it was like a massive movie. Like it was the highest grossing animated movie ever, I think, at the time. Like it was a really big deal. And Shrek 1, I think, won the Oscar.
Yeah,
the first ever one, right? The first animated Oscar, right?
Yep, we talked about that back when we did Monsters, Inc., because it beat Monsters, Inc. for the...
Right, yeah. So, like, those movies were a really big deal. And not just in terms of, like, the box office impact they had and the, like, awards they won, but also in terms of, like, really changing the kinds of, like, animated films that were made for children and adult, and kind of that melding of the two that existed. And now Shrek, I think, has become much more of like an internet meme in some ways. Shrek is love, Shrek is life, and everything. But it was a really big deal. So like that's the first thing. Like people might be surprised to see that it beat Spider-Man 2, but like it was huge in the early 2000s. Mm-hmm. It was a very big deal.
Yeah, and it's also it is interesting. Again, even with like Edge of History now being the National Treasure entry and Puss in Boots being the entry from the Shrek side of things, because from what I've heard, I've not seen it, but I've heard great things about the recent Puss in Boots movie.
People are raving about it, actually.
And it's been holding strong at the box office ever since it came out over the holidays as well. It's obviously being overshadowed by Avatar because it's an Avatar movie, but yeah, it's been out there
too. It's an animated one, but there's also gonna be a Spider-Man movie this year
Yep.
too, and into the Spider-Verse. So it's weirdly enough, it still sort of links up in some ways.
Yep. And obviously we had Spider-Man No Way Home, a couple,
Just a couple years ago.
a year and a half ago back. But yeah, I mean, clearly people are just milking whatever IP they can milk.
Yeah.
But it is also interesting, like those in the context of a pre-MCU world as well.
Yeah.
Other releases of the time, though, that we had the notorious B movie came out November 2nd, 2007, followed by No Country for Old Men on November 9th.
Fantastic movie. Fantastic.
The 1-2 punch of Enchanted and Hitman, November 21st. The Timothy Oliphant one. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Logan and I were talking about the Hitman video game right before we started recording.
Juno, real bad. Juno's great though.
Yeah. Juno came out December 5th. I Am Legend, which is also eventually getting a sequel, it sounds like, came out December 14th.
Fantastic.
The
Wow, that's a crazy.
Yeah, the one we I think we've talked about this before, but there was like a wild December 21st. Everybody trying to get the Christmas box office that year. We had Charlie Wilson's War, National Treasure 2, Sweeney Todd, and Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, all came out December 21st. There Will Be Blood came out December 26th, just in time for the Christmas after spirit. Right. And then it was very slim pickings for like the after the movie section that I usually do. So January 18th, we had 27 Dresses in Cloverfield. And then January 25th, we had Meet the Spartans, which was one of those movies in the vein of Scary Movie and Not Another Teen Movie and stuff like that, featuring Kevin Sorbo. So, yeah. The film here has a runtime of 2 hours and 5 minutes, which I will also say felt very long this time around, at least based on like when I paused the movie and was like, wow, we're only just now getting to, we're getting to Mount Rushmore and there's still 40 minutes left of this movie.
There was a moment where I paused the movie and was like, I feel like I'm like halfway done. And it was like, there's an hour and 40 left. And I was like, what? It's been 20. How is that possible?
Yeah. In the Disney live-action timeline of things, we had The Game Plan, which was a Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson movie, September 28th, 2007, followed by Enchanted, which we mentioned earlier, November 21st. National Treasure Book of Secrets here, December 21st. This was followed up by College Road Trip, which was Martin Lawrence and Raven Simone movie. It was March 7th, 2008. Then Chronicles of Narnia, Prince Caspian, May 16th, and Beverly Hills, Chihuahua, October 3rd of 2008.
Do you know what I'm going to say? Because I say it every time we go over this particular era of movies. I so desperately want to just do a shitty B movies of this era. It's so, like, it's all B movies. It's great. None of these movies, I would argue, are... I would always say none of these movies are great. Maybe Enchanted is the closest. But like otherwise, you're all like, these are good to like bad movies. And I love the fact that like The Game Plan to me is like an Armageddon situation where like I always get that and The Pacifier with Vin Diesel mixed up. That's exactly. It was like, is that the Vin Diesel?
And the Tooth Fairy was in there somewhere as well.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
I will say in there, because this is strictly the live action stuff, I will say in there in the just Disney movies, WALL-E was in there in the mix in there, but obviously I didn't pull it in because I was staying live action focused. So, Disney was running on other cylinders at this time rather than maybe I would say like Enchanted is probably the standout of that bunch.
Yeah, for sure.
Our roll call here, just like last week, John Turteltaub directed, as we touched on last week. He worked on Three Ninjas, Cool Runnings, While You Were Sleeping, Phenomenon the Kid, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, and most recently, The Meg. Our writers from last movie, Cormac and Marion Wibberley, aka the Wibberleys, kind of took point on this one, writing the screenplay and the story. They had previously worked on Charlie's Angels Full Throttle, as well as Bad Boys 2, and they, as we touched on last week, came back to kind of spearhead the Disney Plus series. New to the fold this time around, we have Gregory Poirier, we'll say, is credited for the story. Other credits of his include The Lion King 2, Simba's Pride, and then following this, The Spy Next Door. And then the big one in here that I'm like, how do I not know these names given everything that they're attached to? But it is the writing duo of Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, who've worked on, among other things, Aladdin, The Mask of Zorro, The Road to El Dorado, Shrek, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. And after this, they would go on and work on The Lone Ranger together as well.
Ooh.
So, yeah.
The Johnny Depp Lone Ranger?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Johnny Depp and Army Hammer.
Yeah. That one.
Because yes, it was the Army Hammer Lone Ranger, the Johnny Depp Tonto. And then additionally getting credits here because it's like based on characters created by, we have Jim Koff, Oren Aviv, and Charles Seegers, who we talked about last week as well. But this was for Jim Koff had written Operation Demo Drop and Rush Hour. Oren Aviv and Charles Seegers pretty much only worked on the National Treasure. Our cast of characters, of course, once again, Nicolas Cage as Benjamin Franklin Gates, Raising Arizona, Leaving Las Vegas, The Rock, Face Off, National Treasure series here, Pig, and recently The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent.
Movies were good.
Justin Bartha returning and getting now second billing as Riley Poole. He moved up one, having worked on Geely, National Treasure, and then right after this, I believe, is when the Hangover movies started taking off, or maybe the first Hangover movie had started earlier that year. I don't remember when. I think that was 2007.
The first Hangover, yeah.
The first Hangover movie probably happened earlier that year. We have Diane Kruger returning as Abigail Chase, Troy and Glorious Bastards, Book of Unknown, John Voight returning as Patrick Gates, Midnight Cowboy, Deliverance, Runaway Train, and Anaconda. Helen Mirren making her debut here as Emily Appleton. She, of course, has credits going all the way back to 1967, including Gosford Park, The Queen, which she... there was a trivia thing in there that was basically like, she had been invited to Buckingham Palace to meet the Queen after having played the Queen, but she couldn't because she was in South Dakota filming at Mount Rushmore. So, whoops.
Also, Hangover was 2009.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. For some reason, I thought that was earlier. Thank you. Helen Mirren also worked on the films Red, and she has been in the Fast and Furious series.
Red's great.
Yeah. Ed Harris also making his debut here in the series as
I forgot he was in this.
Yeah, as Mitch Wilkinson. Probably got his earliest big break in the film The Right Stuff as John Glenn. He was also in Field of Dreams as The Voice. He's been in Glengarry Glen Ross. First thing I probably remember him from was Apollo 13, but he was also in The Rock.
That's what I was going to say, yeah.
The Truman Show, Pollock, and most recently, he was the Man in Black in Westworld for many, many years. Mm-hmm. Harvey Keitel returning as Peter Sadusky, Taxi Driver, Bugsy, Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, Sister Act, Little Nicky, Grand Budapest Hotel, and The Irishman.
A million things, right.
Bruce Greenwood here as the President. He's in the film 13 Days, where he played another president, John F. Kennedy.
It's a very good movie, actually.
Yeah. He was also in the film I, Robot with Will Smith, and he was Captain Pike in the rebooted Star Trek series. Mm-hmm. And then a pre-Modern Family Ty Burrell in here as Connor. His big breakout prior to this had been Dawn of the Dead, the 2004 version. Yep. He was just the year... after this, he would go on to be in the Incredible Hulk in the MCU. I don't know who he is in there, but he's somewhere in there. And then he, of course, would go on to be Phil Dunphy for many, many years on Modern Family. 250 episodes, according to IMDb.
Multiple Emmys as well,
yeah.
He's great. Phil's fantastic, yeah.
Yeah, Ty Burrell is really good. And reprising his role as Agent Hendricks, Armando Riesco, once again in here, having been in Garden State, and then he would go on to be in the National Treasure Edge of History series. Some new trivia here for you. The first one listed in IMDb, Disney discovered that the shooting schedule at Mount Rushmore would displace the local Hill City High School prom that is held annually at the location. To make up for this, Disney paid for the prom by providing transportation to a new location in Rapid City, door prizes at the prom, and scholarships for the valedictorians. So that's pretty
legit, actually. Though, yeah.
I mean, it's especially more legit for like the two people that were valedictorians or whatever. I guess I don't know how many valedictorians they had, but yeah, it's all. I mean, the broader thing there for me is like that's really weird that like there's just a school that has their prom at Mount Rushmore every year.
How Hill City High School? Let's see how big this school is. I'm just curious now.
Well, you look that up. I will continue on. While examining the lost page of the diary, the quote historians say that John Wilkes Booth studied Latin because of the writing in the diary and the fact that he said "Sic Semper Tyrannis" after shooting President Lincoln. Real historians or screenwriters should know. I love when IMDb trivia people get like snippy,
sassy. Yeah.
Real historians or screenwriters should know that John Wilkes Booth, along with his brother and father, were famous actors, and their best known performance was of William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. In that play, the character of Brutus yells "Sic Semper Tyrannis" just before the famous slaying in the Senate. John Wilkes always wanted to play Brutus, but his father never let him, instead picking his brother Edwin for the role. It seems that John Wilkes did eventually get to say those famous lines on stage.
Hill City High School has 150 to 165 students. Seems like average.
All right.
So it is very small.
Yeah. This was a fun one. I can't verify it, but IMDb had it, so I'll include it here. The guy who gets his car stolen by Ed Harris in London is the same guy who gets his Hummer stolen by Sean Connery in The Rock.
Oh, God.
Another of Jerry Bruckheimer's movies, which also starred Nicolas Cage and Ed Harris.
That is like, I didn't bring it up, and I should have, because it's like a great usage of the trivia section back when we did that Bond show. So you get surprise special, that Bond show trivia here as well. But it's like really, I guess it's trivia. It's exactly what this should have been. In Moonraker and For Your Eyes Only, and then Living Daylights, I think he makes another appearance. But Moonraker and For Your Eyes Only are the two big ones. There is basically just like a dude who does like really exaggerated like, oh no, reaction faces in the movies. And like in Moonraker, he's like, drinking coffee while like the gondola pops out of the water and drives off. And then in Fear Is Only, it's when they're like skiing and they like smash into the thing and he gets like a cake thrown on top of him kind of shit. And then again, I think he has like one other one in like a few movies later in Living Daylights. But I just love the fact that within the Bond 80s movies, there's just this recurring dude who just has really exaggerated faces and has shit happen to him. It has no name, has no words, just like just an extra in the background who clearly they liked, and we're like, we're just gonna keep bringing you in here. Just give us good faces.
I mean, it's just as plausible as that redneck sheriff showing up
J.W. Pepper,
in the Far East,
taking a vacation to Italy and wherever the hell.
Yeah,
There's only that.
Continuing on with our trivia, as stated in the DVD commentary, experts were brought in to match the handwriting of Abraham Lincoln, Queen Victoria, and Calvin Coolidge. I don't know why that is a thing they decided to spend money on, as if the audience was going to be like, oh my God, that's so authentic. Like any of us know that crap. When showing the map of the grounds to the president, Ben tells him it belonged to a slave of George Washington's named Charlotte. This is the same name as the clue to the Templar treasure that Charles Carroll gave the Gates ancestor, and which turned out to be the name of the ship. Presumably, Mount Vernon was one of many dead ends which Ben pursued in his search for Charlotte and the Templar treasure prior to the events of the first movie, which would explain why he knew about the hidden compartment and how it worked. Or it might just be a sly reference to National Treasure. When they are at Buckingham Palace, Ben Gates tells Abigail that Queen Elizabeth II is not in there because there's no flag at the pole. This hasn't happened since 1997 after Princess Diana's death. There's always a flag attached to the pole. If Her Majesty is in residence, then there's going to be the royal standard. If she's not there, it's the Union Jack flag. So get it right. You guys, you went through all that trouble to analyze the spelling or the handwriting, but you didn't get the flag history right. I guess it's because it was European and British instead of American. The script, this is probably the one that was most interesting to me, and I started like trying to look for it in the third act. Script originally called for Mitch to stab Patrick Gates while they escape from the flooding Gold City. This was taken out in post-production because it made the character cross a line that producer and director John Turteltaub felt ought not to be crossed. This is why there are almost no shots of Patrick Gates remaining in this scene. He was bleeding, and that's hard to hide. His sweater in the next scene had been ripped from the stabbing, but they were able to, quote, unrip his shirt with CG. Page 47 is never identified in the film. It is addressed at the end of the movie by the president and Ben as potentially related to reincarnation or rebirth. It was possibly being used to serve and set up a sequel, or perhaps even two back-to-back sequels, as was the craze around this time. Thanks Matrix and thanks Pirates of the Caribbean. The sequel was announced a year after the movie's release. By 2013, John Turteltaub had claimed that production was slated for 2015. However, obviously here we are in 2023, and the rumors of Page 43 just continue. Nothing ever came of that. And lastly, pulling in here just because I thought it was interesting, the code seen in Booth's diary is an actual text encoded with Playfair method using the keyword death. The complete text says, La Boule Lady will lead to Sibylla Temples of Gold. So if they had the full page, they would have been able to save having to go across the sea. And they would have known exactly what they were trying to get to. So, Logan, what did you think here of National Treasure Book of Secrets? How does it hold up?
Well, it sure is a motion picture film. I think it is not terrible. I mean, I guess in some ways it's a great example of what I mean earlier when I say I just want to do a series on this era of films. It is a movie that doesn't exist any longer, really, right? Like, or it is like straight to like streaming now.
Yeah, exactly. These are the straight to Disney Plus movies,
right? In some ways, it feels really emblematic of the jump from like your Lion King 1 to Lion King 2, your Aladdin 1 to Aladdin 2, like that quality jump. Like this first movie is like, that's a movie that is good, right? Really good, great, right? I would say, right? And the second one is the thing that went straight to DVD in 2004 or like 1995 with Lion King 2, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's really silly. It's a really silly movie. And it's one of those movies where if you think about it at all, it starts to crumble a little bit for you, right? Like I had
my favorite element of that was that they just happened to come across a very historically adept French policeman who can tell them all these things and is happy to translate the French, and also picks Resolute as the translation. Yeah, I think it was like, that's just wild and stupid.
I think for me, I had this thought where, it's sort of endearing in that way, but like it's just a film that you don't really get anymore. I mean, it's really dumb. I mean, it's not definitely to the quality of the first one. I think he's just Ed Harris. I mean, he's got an actual name. I've already blanked. Mitch, I think, right? Yeah.
Mitch Wilkinson.
He's a terrible villain, right? I mean, he's just really dumb. And like, it's through no fault of Ed Harris, who is a great actor, who I'm sure we both love in many, many roles. He's not Sean Bean, though, who just, I think, has a level of fun and is also just like allowed to actually be a bad guy in a way that Mitch isn't ultimately. Mm-hmm. And who's, I think, Sean Bean's motivations are simpler, right? And more clear. Like, he's a bad guy. I want the money. I want the treasure to be rich. And it's like, I can understand that. That's pretty simple enough. And we don't have there's no sort of redemptive arc here. There's no sort of like, oh, okay, he's misunderstood. It's just like, no, I get that. I don't need any more from a villain in this movie. He's a bad guy. He's Sean Bean. He's going to have fun with it. Great. And Mitch isn't really given that. He's also in and out of the movie a lot, I feel like.
As with again, Sean Bean.
Maybe, I was going to say, maybe it's like a Far Cry thing, but like Sean Bean, at least, I feel like, is like really memorable when he popped up. And I feel like Ed Harris is just sort of like there. And so that's part of the issue I have. But like, yeah, it's all really silly. Like one of the ones for me is just like, Ben doesn't care, but like, capture, like secludes the president away at Mount Vernon. Mm-hmm. And then the president's like, they're going to, like, I understand what you did here. Here's the information you need kind of thing. But like, just be aware, like, they're going to think you tried to kidnap me. And it's like, why? You could tell them the situation. You're the president. Like, they are going to, if you just say he didn't, they're not going to be bothered by that. Like, there's easy way to stop this problem from happening, right? Like, it's not like it is in the first one where it's like, oh, like, they think this thing is true because you did do it. You did steal the Declaration of Independence. It doesn't matter if your motivations are correct or not. Like, you did do it. That's why they're all upset. That's why you're on the run. That makes sense. Here, it's like, well, no, there's a pretty easy fix to the solution. Just say he didn't kidnap me. We just had a conversation. I let him away, and everyone's gonna be fine. And so,
you mean the thing he does at the end of the movie?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, why are we not? Exactly. That's a great. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Like, it's so silly. It's just like we could have solved this already, right? And yeah, it's so much of that stuff. I do think I'm someone who doesn't. I don't typically like the like, this person is a bad guy, and then like at the very end, it's like, oh, also like, I'm good now. Let me hold the freaking thing open for you as I sacrifice myself for you, even though 45 minutes ago in London, I'm shooting at you right in a car. It's like, well, I don't what like,
and
I haven't seen
and
anything
10 minutes
to suggest.
ago at the beginning of this cave, I was like, no, I'm going first because I know you guys will outvote me and I'll die if I don't.
It's why are we doing it? Like it's such a, like, just have him die on the tunnel. I don't need him to like save everyone else. Like, I don't need that redemptive arc from it. It's such a weird moment. It is one of the few things that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull did well, is that the like Indiana Jones is like shitty, like will he get, won't he get friend, doesn't get a moment to redeem himself. He just gets killed. And it's like, great. I didn't need him to like sacrifice himself. He's a shitty dude. And yeah, that's sort of not where we get here. I do really, really love, though, I think it's really funny, is Riley pretty much throughout the movie is still, I think, one of the best parts of the film. I love this idea of like, within a couple of years, him squandering his entire fortune due to like a shitty accountant, him like having to like write the book without Ben on how they found the treasure, him like dressed up in the outfit, his Ferrari getting towed. Like, it's all great and really funny and silly. And I think that is a character that I really enjoy a lot. And like, I think I would just be down to like hang out with him on adventure. Cause like, let's be honest, like, especially like the Ben Gates we get in this movie where they like crank up his obnoxiousness to like 11 would not be a fun person to hang out with. But like Riley would be. Riley would be like, I feel like a pretty chill dude to just like grab a drink with and just like shoot the shit with. And so I think he's great in the movie still.
And just
he's probably the most fun part.
Yeah, he'll just hack Buckingham Palace from a bathroom stall. Yeah.
It's phenomenal. That is a great bit too, of like them kicking up the door, just random dude in the toilet. That was also pretty good.
Yeah.
Trevor, what'd you think?
I think I another just really stupid moment I want to give a shout out to is can you take a picture of this? No, the camera on my phone's broken. All right, we're gonna run a red light, and he holds up the thing because of course red light cameras are known for their high end quality accuracy, right? that is gonna absolutely be able to be legible and stuff. It's just like that's just very dumb.
It's great. It's great.
Yeah, this movie is it was giving me the same vibes that like I remember just midway through another thing we were talking about before we started recording, the Rise of Skywalker, just being like, all right, like so many of the steps on this journey of, okay, we need to get from here to here to here to here are just purely coincidental that like none of it makes sense. And the thing I was thinking about before we started recording today was why was this treasure even hidden where it was hidden in the first place, and the people who were involved with it, how were they involved? Like, how was the guy that how was Laboulet like tied into it in the first place, so that he's like leaving clues to this treasure on the Statue of Liberty, in the Resolute desk? Like, why was he a puzzle guy that was like brought in to hide this? And I know like there's one line that's like, he was also a Mason. It's like, okay, so
love that.
So why wasn't he in with the Templar treasure? Yeah. Why is he also in with this El Dorado treasure, the City of Gold kind of thing? So there was a lot of like, wait, just like clearly, I get that you needed a treasure, but it very much is like we talked about last week. Like they just clearly had no good ideas as a follow up for this one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the movie suffers from that. I think it does a lot of the issues I have with sequels of like, all right, well, we're going to like reset everybody. Even people who made growth and made change at the end of the movie, we're going to reset them here so that they can go on that same arc again. And that's what you get with like Ben and Abigail. Like, oh, they were separated and now they have to come back together. And even there, like, there's no real reason for them to come back together. But by the end, she's like, yeah, you should move back in. It's like, but where did that come from? Like, there wasn't even really a romance between them in this one.
For me, it's Ben's parents, right? Like, there's no reason for Ben's mom to be in this movie, really. And then there's like, there was a line of like, you know, like, I haven't seen her in 32 years, I think it is. And then like, by the end of the movie, they're all like, you know, batting eyelids and like flirty. And it's like, well, clearly, like, I feel like you guys must have hated each other to not talk for 32 years. I don't feel like I've seen nothing here to suggest that like you are that friendly that over like a day and a half, you're going to suddenly be like, oh, like we're in love again. Kind of vibes. It's like, well, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, there's like that. There's like, I kind of almost felt like there was really no point in Sadusky and the FBI like being there, except for they were in the original, and so we're gonna like keep them in there. Yeah. So yeah, there were a lot of like, all right, none of that makes sense. That doesn't make sense. That does make sense. Whatever. You're just kind of moving along. Even the clues that like, so he had these clues that were clearly referencing a place at Mount Rushmore, I guess. But he had to go through all of the other stuff to get to know it was supposed to be at Mount Rushmore. It was, like Mitch like talks about how he's got like the last clues at the end of the thing. And it's like, but like, why? Or how did you have those clues, but none of this other stuff? So, and why was the only way you could think to try and like go down this path to besmirch the Gates name and do this whole public like thing at the end of a speech that, or like a presentation or whatever that you know they give us the like the backstory for the prologue, all that whatever. It's like, I feel like you could have just been like, hey, this guy is a pretty renowned treasure hunter and his family name happens to match this page that I have. Let's see if he can help try and like uncover this without going into this whole like we need to drag, and also the whole like even I was gonna say it, like dragging him through the mud, that whole like little anecdote that we get. I'm like, if that's true or not, nobody's associating him with that. Even the subtitles were saying drag through the mud MUD and then talking about the person MUDD. So it's like whenever somebody says dragging through the mud, we're talking about dragging somebody's name through the muck. That's not in reference to a person. Nobody thinks about that as in reference to a person. Ben Gates, you weird man, you.
I think that, yeah, I mean, it is the thing we talked the most about going to this movie. It remains, for me, the single dumbest aspect of the film, and the element that I don't like the most, which is like the entire setup and motivation for this film is completely silly. It's just so silly. Like, what are you talking about? Like, no one cares or knows about anyone other than John Wilkes Booth, right? And like, I had forgotten that Riley even says like, exactly, now, no one will care, and it's like, literally, that's correct. It's been like, what are you talking? Like, no,
you're the anomaly here, Ben, that does know these other conspirators. You're the weirdo.
You're a freak. Like, I have a degree in this stuff, and even I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, like mud is one, right? Like that kind of like I'm scrambling for this. I've studied since I was 5, right? Like no one cares because other people are important. It just matters the guy who pulled the trigger, right? That's the key actor here, right? And so it's like, no, it doesn't change anything. Also, the fact that it's like even Ben calls it up like, oh, like it's like, you know, I already forget the word was, but whatever the word was in Latin, it's like it could mean this or mastermind. Yeah, it could mean he wasn't even involved, right? And like how quickly everyone's just like, oh, his ancestor's a shit dude here. He's a bad guy. It's like y'all just believe this really easily with pretty faint evidence that is also very circumstantial, right? Like it's like there's a lot here. I'm like, y'all are shitty historians, guys. I gotta be honest with you. You gotta beef up your history department here if this is what you're falling for.
Yeah, in that spirit of like people only remember Booth. I always think it like slight tangent here, but it's the same kind of like mentality that I have of anytime there's a shooting and people are like, don't publicize the name of the shooter. Like they wanted fame. And I'm like, if they want fame, that makes no sense because nobody knows the names of the shooters. They know that they know the shootings by the location. They know Columbine. Yeah. They know Aurora. They like that's what they know. Nobody knows the names of these shooters. They're a blip in time, and we remember the event more than remember the person. So it's like it's always a weird like, okay, that's a weird argument that you're trying to make. And so, yeah, it's very much the same one that I like. I obviously we had talked about that a little bit last week. I didn't remember, since I think I've only seen this the one time, that Riley also calls it out.
Yeah. And then it's like dismissed in such a weird way, right? It's like, I think, you know, it again is indicative to me of just like, they needed a reason to have been involved. They needed a reason for his dad to care. They needed a reason to bring the mom on. It's like, how do we do it? Make it directly about the family. And like how like heated his dad got about his grandpa telling him about his grandpa, who he would have never met, mind you, because Ben's dad's grandpa's grandpa, right, died when Ben's dad's grandpa's dad was a child, right? So they never would have, like, none of people would have ever met each other. It's such a weird, like, intense relationship he had from his grandpa, telling a story about his grandpa who he didn't meet. And it's like I
thought the lineage was, we've got Ben, we've got Ben's dad, we've got Christopher Plummer, Ben's dad's dad, so Ben's grandpa. And then I thought the kid in the beginning of this is Christopher Plummer's dad. So
I've understood
John Voight's grandfather.
I've understood it as the John Voight's grandpa, who would be Christopher Plummer's dad, was telling the story, but he was the grandson of the guy who dies and the son of the person who dies, right? So it basically been like an extra generation in between the two of them. Is how it is. So basically, it would have been Ben's great grandpa was the guy who got killed. That's how it sounded like in the movie to me.
I mean,
it doesn't matter.
Either way, it is this point. Like weird thing of like, I mean, like part of I think the thing on that the movie just could also have been like clear is like the reason I think the kid is John Voight's grandfather is because we so often forget like how long ago that was. Like it feels like so much further because of like our American history classes and stuff like that. And it's like it's the thing that I see this make the rounds every now and then. It's like so and so was alive when Harriet when so and so was born. Harriet Tubman was alive, and when they died, you know, I don't remember who it was, but it's like it's that kind of like
John Tyler's grandsons are still alive, right, from the 10th president, right? Like it's that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, we kind of like squish down and think like, oh, this was such a long time ago. It's like, Civil War was 1800s, and you know there were
150 years ago, basically, right? It's basically two generations from
So so that's where I think like they could have played with that a little bit of like. Even with that little time that has passed, people only think of Booth or something like that.
It's also that thing of, even just from like personal perspectives, like, do you know who your great-great-grandpa is, Trevor? I don't know who my I couldn't name him, you know, if someone asked me, right? And it's that thing of like, it's also just a weird aspect in that too. Like, he's a historian who's like really weird about this stuff, but even still, it's just like, even that is so far removed, right? Like your great-great-grandpa is your grandpa's grandpa, right? And so it's like, like there's just no sort of like, your grandpa probably never met that person even, right? Based on like, you know, what health and modern, you know, medical science was in that time period, right? And so it's like, it's just so far removed that it's so hard to keep that like personal connection attached. So many of us don't even know their names, right? And so it's just such a weird motivation. Like there was no reason why it couldn't have just been like, hey, Ben, like, you know, here's an extra treasure hunt to go on, right? Like Indiana Jones didn't need a like personal motivation for each new adventure. It's just like, like here's a new adventure I'm on, right?
Just
hit the ground running.
He just needed to be fighting Nazis.
Yeah, and that's really all that mattered, right? And that's like the thing. And so it is where they try to make it like so personal. And they're probably like, oh, it worked the first round, let's do it again. But I think it ends up being one of the weaker elements of the movie.
Yeah. Especially because, again, like, it's already a weird stretch of like, oh, so now it's saying their family is just tied to all of these like historical events in American history. It's like, okay. Again, so they were pretty much their own secret society just alongside the Masons, but they were just they were never invited to the Masons party.
Yeah. They just weren't good for most of the generations. They were really inept at it. It could make any forward. That's like the other thing to think about. It's like, yeah, Ben's whatever grandpa from the first movie, all the way through basically Ben made no progress on discovering that. And it's like, all right, that's kind of a weird, like, what did they do for like 50 years each on their career, just making no forward progress? And like, how did it take them that long to go through all the possible Charlottes out there? Like, it's only so many options from that time period, surely. And so I do think it's, again, that thing of like, if you think about it too hard, it immediately starts getting like, well, hang on, like, y'all are really bad historians.
Yeah. Also, it's another one of those, I think we talked about this last week too, of like, it's that weird thing of like pre-smartphone technology. And so they just kind of play with it and do anything. And here they just completely clone a phone, which obviously like can be done. But it's, the fact that they just completely clone a phone to explain why they're on the same step as everybody else the entire journey. Oh, because they're hearing everything they tell to John Voight.
Cloning phone is really what popped on the screen, was pretty funny. Like, oh, they're just playing fast and this. Again, it's like, in some ways, it's sort of like, it's a very clinical screenwriting thing of just being like, yeah, like, we just need them to be on the trail. Let's not bother to be like, oh, they're also very good at this. Just be like, no, like, he cloned it. He can follow him whatever they want now. I have to like write that part of the script now. I can just get them there whenever I need to. And so it's a very lazy, cheap way to just kind of have them follow around.
Also, looking at I'm just like, I've got the Wikipedia pulled up in case there was anything else I wanted to reference on the film. The absolute dumbest, worst, most egregious, like, that's just a screenwriter thinking they're clever and they're really just the dumbest fucking man or person. The argument that Nicolas Cage gets into with a child at the Easter egg thing at the White House, a child that wouldn't know any of this shit ever, period, getting so like uproariously heated in a debate about it. I was just like, what is this? What is even the purpose of this?
Really weird.
Yeah.
That is, I'm glad you brought that up actually, because I'd forgotten it and I did want to talk about it when I watched it, is there are a lot of weird scenes in this movie, like way more than the first one. Like, I think the first one is a good movie, a really good movie, and then especially in terms of like how it is structured, it's all put together, I think, in a good way here. And this one, there's so many scenes where it's like, what did that exist for? Right? Like, there's a whole scene early on in the movie after Ed Harris like confronts him, right? And they're like, oh, like, you're whatever was a traitor kind of thing. And then it quickly transitions to a scene at night of just like Ben standing in like the silhouetted doorway of his dad's house, just like looking at the camera for like 5 seconds, nothing, just 5 seconds looking at the camera. And then it cuts to his dad just going like, oh, and then it cuts back to Ben. And then that's it. There's no dialogue in that sequence. It's just like them each reacting in such a weird way. And then we're on to the next beat. And it's like, why is this scene in the movie? Like, there was that served no purpose. And there were so many weird, like, small scenes of like, why is this like 15-second thing in the film? Like, there's like no reason for it to exist. It's more distracting than it is helpful. And this movie had a couple of those where I was like, that's a weird thing to include here. Again, and it's just one of those things of just like, the quality not being there from the first to second one, and then not having, as much to fill in the film, right? This movie is a 2-hour film that doesn't feel like it's 2 hours at all. It feels way longer, but also feels like it somehow is really stretching itself to get there at the same time.
Yeah, they stretch it out quite literally to just go to Paris and go to England, go to Paris and go to London, just for clues that take them back stateside. And it's like, what is the, like, they very easily could have cut that and consolidated that. But they wanted to have those like globe-trotting shots in the trailer stuff. Also, the incredibly contrived trailer shot of I'm gonna kidnap the president of the United States because, of course, even by this point, we're gonna steal the Declaration of Independence had been a meme,
had become a thing, right? Yeah.
So, like, of course, they got to have that. They have got to put whatever that moment is going to be in this movie in there. And it's like, all right, yeah, I guess kidnapping a president would be the next thing up that you can do in terms of like federal offenses.
Treason,
in a very
right?
political way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just like, and
it's
but shout out to Bruce Greenwood having that one moment that, yeah, again, also doesn't need to be in this movie at all. And we just have that weird cut back to him finding the trucker on the road of like, well, this is going to be interesting. It's like, yeah, it is going to be interesting. Why was that not resolved 15 minutes ago in this movie? Like, have you just been wandering the woods while they did the whole thing over at the Library of Congress? That's weird, Mr. President. That's very weird.
It's just an odd movie, right? And like in some ways, it reminds me, as all things must, right, of like Quantum of Solace, right, and James Bond, where like that we talked a lot about that movie at the time about how that's maybe like the weirdest directed Bond film. Like it's the shortest movie in the series. It is like 60% poorly shot action sequences just because it was
it's the foot chase, it's the car chase, it's the boat chase, it's the plane chase. Yeah.
And none of them are done well. They're all cut super rapid and with really odd shots in between, like thrown in the mix of there too, because they didn't have a script. They just need to like make a movie exist with only like 40 minutes of dialogue. So here's like an hour of action scenes aren't very good, right? And it sort of has that same vibe to me here of like, we don't really have a 2-hour long movie. We've got like the things we want to do and then not really a way to get there. Like even like the Book of Secrets like is a thing that isn't introduced until like
an hour
into the movie. Yeah. And it's just like, what are we doing right now? Like what is like the main through line here? Like it's just way more muddled.
And even even the Book of Secrets isn't the right title for this movie. Like
yeah, exactly.
like the Book of Secrets is just is barely a MacGuffin in this movie. Like it's not the treasure
it's so
they're after.
Odd.
It's
such a weird thing. Yeah, and I think you already said it, but I think the best way to describe the movie is just it was very clearly a movie where they used all of their ideas in the first one and they were like, well, that went better than we thought. Let's make another one now, right? It's the same thing of like, how do we make a sequel to Taken, which was surprisingly successful? Well, let's just take another one. Let's just take another family member and go through the list here for Taken 2 and 3, right? And it's just that, yeah, we've already sort of done a thing that wasn't meant to have a follow-up, and now it does, and we want to have to be fair to National Treasure 2, it was far more successful than I thought. It grossed almost $500 million. So who am I to judge, I guess? Like it did way better than I thought it did at the box office by about $300 million. I would have pegged it for like 150 million or something like that. And so it did very good. But yeah, it's just such a weird movie pretty much constantly that has like fun, silly moments at times that I enjoy, right? And I don't even necessarily hate the performances. They're just all operating in a world that is just kind of mad a little bit, right? And utterly bonkers, but not like in fun ways. And so they're just sort of having to like do their best in this kind of environment.
Mm-hmm. It is also interesting just realize like it like we talked about, like the first one especially came out in that nice sweet spot. There weren't any Indiana Jones movies or anything like that. Obviously, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull comes out a year after this one. Mm-hmm. And does that one also center around like, or the myth of that one is that also around El Dorado? I feel like it is kind of, right? I mean, it's definitely like Mesoamerica.
Yeah, definitely Mesoamerican, like gold treasure city.
Yeah.
Again, and they also introduced a MacGuffin halfway into that movie about like, here are aliens now instead.
Yeah.
And people didn't like that, obviously. But yeah, it's also we talk a lot about.
Yeah, it was. They have the whole thing about going to Akatar aka El Dorado, aka the City of Gold. So it's like weird that both of those within a year
are the same thing,
are hitting on the same.
Also, for what it's
like,
worth,
here's another mythological story or treasure that we can go after.
It's funny to say that too, because also, when I think about this, 2007 was Uncharted 1 and El Goddamn Dorado, right? And so it's very much was like of the moment kind of thing. But this movie, I think, is also interesting because, you know, you sort of said the first thing came out like at that perfect time. I think a lot about in terms of how we've done a lot of movies, and I talk a lot about how like I particularly have an affinity for like 90s movies into like the like early to mid 2000s kind of range. And this movie sort of finds itself at like the very end of that list of like technology is becoming more popular, but also like the Dark Knight trilogy is happening. The MCU is getting to take off, right? Like movies as a whole are about to like fundamentally shift, and the middle is about to like drop out, right? And this is sort of like one of the last gasps of in era, really. And so it's also interesting from that perspective too, right? Like if a National 3 or if a National Treasure 3 had existed and it had probably come out, let's say like 4 years after this, like it would have just been such a different film probably, or it would have bombed, right? Like if they tried to do the same thing, because like films themselves were just changing right as this was coming out to the state we are in now. And so it's also interesting from that perspective. It's sort of like one of the last of a particular era.
Yeah, I will say even in the Edge of History series, they did tease in the episode that Riley shows up. They did tease the Page 47 theory that has been floating around of like that's what the next movie is going to be about. So yeah, he basically like kind of plants the seed that maybe we're gonna maybe we have 47 reasons to buy my next book or something. I don't remember what it was, but basically it was a very overt page 47 reference. Interesting. And it's such a weird, like I will say it's almost like an FU, because in the world we live in now, that goes nowhere. So it is a plot point that is brought up multiple times in this movie with no resolution, with nothing to go alongside it. And so it is just like, that's more time that is wasted in this movie, setting up something that maybe they wanted to happen, but clearly never did. They should have had some deals in place or whatever, especially for the movie was the 8th highest grossing movie. Like, how did they not go ahead and put together a third movie with that? You know, maybe it was Nicolas Cage didn't want to do it. Maybe that was when he was going off and starting to do Ghost Rider. I don't remember timelines of things.
Maybe.
But yeah,
I know that Nicolas Cage is the one too who in like interviews has sort of been like, you know, we're not going to do a third one. Like I read something recently like him being like, like they did a TV show instead of a movie. Like that's the route they're going to go in. Like we're not going to do a third one kind of thing. Like I don't know how much he wants to do it necessarily. And like fair enough, right? Like you did 2 of them. They were very successful. One in particular is like a cultural touchstone for a generation. Like, you know, how much more do you need to really go back to that well? And also like you are 60 years old now. Do you want to do necessarily like an action adventure movie in the same vein? So I don't know.
You live in a world that exists after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Do you realize, hey, maybe I don't want to be the 60-year-old Indiana Jones.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
he's learning from Harrison Ford's mistakes.
Honestly, you just said you live in a world of legacy sequels in general, right? And how many of those have actually been good, right? It's that thing to me of like Top Gun Maverick is very, 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 very much the exception and not the rule for these kind of legacy sequels, right? And so, do you necessarily want to do one that I would say is strongly likely to probably be the worst of the, then trilogy if it did come out? So,
well, we'll see what happens there. Any last favorite moments or anything you want to give a shout out to there, Logan?
I already give a shout out to it, but I'll do it again. I do really like Riley in this movie. And I think, he's in Edge of History and he is just like a fun, silly, lighthearted character that I think brings a lot of joy to the proceedings throughout it. Helen Mirren is Helen Mirren. I do not need her in this movie, but I love Helen Mirren, so I'm not going to complain. And then, I think it's just a weird movie, right? I similar would have said, like, I don't think it is, like, bad. But it is definitely not good either, right? It sort of exists in that gray space.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it definitely is a lot of a movie, and yeah, most of it.
There's so many movies.
Most of it does not work for me. So there's very clearly a reason that I didn't ever like revisit this one in the way that maybe I knew more about National Treasure. I think also there to maybe what we discussed last time. Maybe there is also a hint of truth there too. Like, well, yeah, this one doesn't have as much like. I mean, there is elements of like, okay, yeah, we're gonna like, I guess the elements that do take us outside of the States are all very well known things, or at least I certainly knew and remembered them. Of like, okay, yeah, there's a Statue of Liberty, maybe it's because I've also seen the Statue of Liberty in Paris. And I remember like discovering that or learning about that when I was over there after graduating in high school and going on like a European trip and being like, oh, that's cool. I didn't know. Finding out the history of that. But then also like the Resolute Desk and stuff like that. It's like, okay, like even if I didn't remember or know that there was one in Buckingham Palace, I would also immediately be like, well, I know there's a very famous one in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So yeah, it's there's this like weird, the history on this one just also isn't great. So
it's also more jumping around too. Like we're going from the Civil War to like the 1920s, the Mount Rushmore stuff, right? And so it's also like less concentrated on like a particularly potent like that. And that's the thing too. Like we each had talked about it last week. I can't remember if it was off air, like on air, where like it's the Civil War one, and like it's actually not really that concentrated around the Civil War when you really think about like a lot of the details. And so like it is interesting that they had either the most or like the second most like discussed, talked about, taught era of American history, and then like didn't really utilize it, instead focused on like the years after it, going into like the 1920s. Like it was a strange decision in some ways to like not make it as like central a thing as the Revolutionary War founding era was in the first one.
Yeah, I mean, like realistically, I guess that's probably what the movie maybe needed, was that instead of just being like a black market dealer, Mitch should have been like the one continuing on the KCG or whatever. Yeah, the whatever like that was to tie it back to that whole story. Because
which is sort of what I thought when I first showed it. I was like, that's.
Yeah, the only Civil War stuff is the Lincoln assassination. Like everything, all of the Label A stuff, well before, obviously, like back around the founding of the nation and all that stuff. And then we get to then basically it just sits dormant for a while, and then Calvin Coolidge finds finds a plank in his desk because he
good old Silent Cal,
because he clearly was finding or playing around with the drawers. In a weird way. Just a very, very odd puzzle that they were trying to solve. All right. Well, let's dive into the report card where we grade from A+ to F. What do you want to give National Treasure Book of Secrets here, Logan?
That's a good question. I will give National Treasure Book of Secrets. Ultimately, I don't think it's bad. I'll give it a C-, right? Like I think ultimately, sort of like I said last week, I think too, actually, I think Nicolas Cage is just engaging enough, right? I think, Justin Bertha is engaged enough, Diane Kruger's engaged enough, John Voight, Helen Mirren, I think the cast is engaging and fun enough that like, if it were other actors in this, I think it could have potentially been like really, really not very good. And instead I think it's like a movie that is not bad, definitely not good, sort of like that in between, like this is okay, this is a fine movie, and it like just sort of avoids a D+ territory for me. It's a C- on the edge.
I am gonna go D+. And
totally fair.
I think D+ for me has often also become like a shorthand of like, this is that quintessential like, this is a movie that didn't hold up well, and this is a movie that isn't great. It's not terrible. It's not like complete flat out F, but it's also like
$80 million cook-off, right?
It's like there's little in the way of like redeeming fun about this. I
Totally
absolutely never need to watch this movie again, and I won't be missing out on anything. So yeah, in honor of the name of our podcast, I'm going to go with a D+ on this one. Some extra credit, other suggestions if you like this. Pretty much the exact same list as last week, but with National Treasure: Edge of History or National Treasure and Book of Secrets, which was on last week's list, swapped. So you have National Treasure: Edge of History promoting the new show, which I did see on like Nielsen does like streaming ratings, which admittedly aren't all streaming platforms, and they're a month behind usually, and they don't register all streaming devices or something like that. But in the Nielsen rating, it was in a top 10 show for streaming services midway through its run, which in particular was interesting because I remember walking out of the episode I did with Frank on that of like, yeah, I've not seen anybody talking about this show at all. So, maybe it found an audience, but they're not our audience or they're not in our circle or anything like that. But so yeah, seeing it had like 500,000 views or something like that. So shout out to that.
I will say that in a future National Treasure movie, if it exists, I think it's close. Like I could see myself going back and forth on it, but like right now, I think I would be more interested in a National Treasure movie centered around that cast than a third one with Nicolas Cage and Riley and Diane Kruger. Like I think I'd actually be more interested in one with like that younger cast, and then maybe like Nick Cage makes like a cameo appearance in there at the end or something like that. Like I would be more curious to see what they could do with a bigger budget for that group, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of where I'm at.
He's a stop on their journey of like, hey, we really need somebody who knows this part of American history really well. I know just the guy, and they show up at Nicolas Cage's Ben Gates's office or something.
And like I think it'd even be cool if they like he's off doing his own thing. Like he's like has like 47 shit in the background, right? Like he's doing his own. It feels like he's just doing his own thing, and they're doing their own thing, and like they're just gonna kind of cross in the path. Like I think that'd be really cool, like you said. And so if they do have a future movie, I think I'd want it to be that kind of thing.
Yeah. But the other extra credit options are, in addition to National Treasure, you have Mulan, A Wrinkle in Time, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales, Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Lightning Thief, and The Sorcerer's Apprentice.
It's a rough one. It's a rougher one.
Yeah. Extracurriculars. You watching anything else on Disney Plus these days, Logan?
That's a great question. I don't think so. It's not on Disney Plus. It's on Hulu, but Disney owns them both, so I'm going to count it. Abbott Elementary continues to be really fantastic, and I encourage everyone to go watch that. It's all on Hulu, and it's really, 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 really funny and very good.
Cool. I admittedly was only half paying attention to it yesterday, but I did catch up while I was playing some other stuff. I caught up on Clone Wars. Or the Bad Batch, rather, not Clone Wars, the Bad Batch. So watching, the latest handful episodes there, one or two standouts, but a lot of just kind of like, well, this is just other stuff that's happening during this era. Okay. There was like a 2-part episode in there that was very much like basically an allegory for like veterans' rights, but in this case, like clone troopers' rights, right. Which also kind of like feeds into the beginning of the Imperial Stormtrooper era.
Right.
So yeah, that was an interesting little nugget in the lore of Star Wars stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much, I think, the only thing I've really been watching over there. So yeah, that is going to do it for this week's episode of That D Plus Show. Thank you, Logan, for joining me to talk about National Treasure these last couple weeks. You can follow Logan at Lefty Logie, Logggy. Anything you want to give a shout out to there, Logan?
Hey, go check out That New Site Show going off every Monday morning. Trevor and Cameron and myself and Frank and Jazz will talk about stuff and have thoughts on things and go over reviews and whatnot.
Yeah, this last week's episode was our Quantum Mania spoiler cast with Cameron and myself.
Go check it out. Cameron liked it more than Trevor, but what else is new? You know what I mean? Really. So go check that out. Maybe this upcoming week you'll get to see me talk about a Bollywood movie that was very divisive among my viewing party. So that was a lot of fun. Very divisive. And so, yeah, it could be a good little time. So stay tuned for that. And then always take a look at stuff happening every Tuesday and Thursday. What could that be, Trevor?
Yeah, you follow me at Trevor J. Starkey, where and you can follow That Nerdy Site's YouTube channel, youtube.com/thatnerdysite, which you may already be on if you're watching the video version of this, where Tuesdays and Thursdays we have our That Nerdy Site Plays series. Right now, Tuesdays are dedicated to Elden Ring, where Cameron is dragging me through that. Although, and the episodes have not gone out yet, but in the episodes we've recorded, we've kind of reached a turning point where like I'm now strong enough that I'm like holding my own in some things. And there's one episode coming up where we fight like a whole bunch of bosses over the course of the episode, and the majority of them I end up taking out myself without Cameron around. So stay tuned for that on Tuesdays, and in anticipation for Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, I'm replaying through Breath of the Wild on Thursdays right now. And we'll see. I know Cameron's been playing around with the idea of a potential other series that you may see, but we'll see if that actually ends up coming out. But yeah, keep an eye out for those series and any other Let's Plays we end up doing on the YouTube channel. You can follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site, or go to thatnerdysite.com for all the latest from us. Once again, if you liked what you heard, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, ring notification bells, all that fun stuff. As always, stay nerdy, be good to each other, and class dismissed.